Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. This is our Monday show where we take a look at the weekend and get you ready for the week ahead. Today is Monday, May 13th, 2024, and I'm Becca Skutak, a senior reporter here at TechCrunch. On today's show, we have a looming strike for workers at a Maryland Apple store, what to expect from OpenAI's livestream today, and a pitch deck teardown for a software supply chain platform called Cloudsmith. Let's get started. Our first big story we're diving into today takes a look at some recent employment news coming out of Apple. To start, the unionized retail workers at Apple's Townson, Maryland store this Saturday voted to authorize a strike. Now, listeners, if the Townson, Maryland Apple store sounds familiar and you don't live near that store specifically, it might be because that was the first Apple retail store with a formally recognized union, which came from a vote back in June 2022. Well, the date of this strike for the Townson, Maryland store union is TBD. The union has been negotiating with Apple since last January over a list of issues, including work-life balance, unpredictable scheduling, and wages. In a statement by the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers Coalition of Organized Retail Employees, also known as IAMCOR, quoted, "This vote is the first step in demonstrating our solidarity and sends a clear message to Apple. The passage of the strike sanction vote highlights IAMCOR's unwavering commitment to advocating for the rights and well-being of workers in the face of challenges. As discussions with Apple management continue, we remain committed to securing tangible improvements that benefit all employees." And that is not the only employment news coming out of Apple this week. According to Bloomberg, a store in Short Hill, New Jersey, tried to vote to unionize and failed last week as well. And earlier in that week, the National Labor Relations Board ruled that Apple violated federal labor laws when they confiscated union flyers and interrogated staff about unionizing efforts at the Apple store in New York's World Trade Center back in 2022. But not all the news coming out of Apple this week was employment related. It was a busy week for Apple in general. All this news comes on the heels of Apple's big iPad event last week, which we have plenty of coverage on over on TC if you missed it or want to dive in deeper. Also last week, Bloomberg reported that Apple is closing in on a deal with OpenAI to use ChatGPT features on its iOS 18 software. This is part of a broader push to bring AI features to Apple devices and is actually the perfect segue to our next story of the day. Our second story of the day involves a company I am sure you have heard of if you have followed anything in the tech sphere over the last 2 years, OpenAI. OpenAI is trying to set expectations ahead of its live-streamed announcement today at 1 p.m. Eastern. On Friday, Sam Altman put a stop to the rumors that the company was going to use this live stream to release a Google search competitor. In a tweet, Sam Altman said, "Not GPT-5, not a search engine, but we've been hard at work at some new stuff we think people will love. Feels like magic to me." The information in Bloomberg had previously reported that OpenAI has a search product partly powered by Bing, according to the information, which isn't too surprising, given Microsoft's partnership with and investment in OpenAI, and will work as a feature within ChatGPT, allowing the chatbot to search the web and cite sources, according to Bloomberg. Per TC's Anthony Ha, in theory at least, OpenAI could announce a search feature, which means Altman's insistence that it's not a search engine could still be true. But I mean, hey, I think all of us are in agreement here that it would not be bad for another search engine to get started if you have ever used any of the current ones available in the past few years. That's it for me this morning, but keep an eye on TechCrunch for even more tech, startup, and venture news as the week goes on. As always, if you want to dive deeper into anything we talked about today, we'll have links to the stories we covered in our show notes. Now let's check in with Haya Comps for today's pitch deck teardown. Take it away, Haya.
All right, everyone, I'm Haya, and I'm back with another pitch deck teardown. This week, we're looking at Cloudsmith's deck. Cloudsmith secured a $15 million Series A funding for its cloud platform. The 2021 round was the largest Series A for a company from Northern Ireland since 2005, so clearly they got a thing or two right. I took a closer look to figure out how the company pulled it off. Cloudsmith had a 36-slide deck, which is a little bit excessive. As I wrote last year, most startups need around 16 slides to tell their full story. There's a few slides in there that aren't needed. Nobody wants or needs to see a full org chart, for example. But that aside, let's dive in and take a closer look at what did work. I really love how Cloudsmith created a great summary slide. It really helps investors understand the stage and status of the company really, really well. And the way to think about that is, in the first couple of slides, you really got to set the stage. So the investor can get a context for what they're trying to understand about what you're trying to do. So that means, understanding what space you're in, what you're trying to accomplish, how much money you're raising, how far along your journey you are, all those kinds of things. Putting all of that together helps the investor contextualize what they're about to see, and they can start thinking about why your company is such a good investment opportunity. Cloudsmith uses a then, now, next structure, which I think is a really good idea. It really helps tell the history of where you've been, capture what you're doing with a current fundraise, and then lift your eyes to the horizon to explain where you want to go next. Now, the past is important because it helps explain how you got to where you're going, and it helps tell the story of why you're a good founding team. But that's not where you're spending most of your time. The investors are investing in the future of your company, so keep your focus on the immediate future and the long-term vision for where you want to go. The other thing I really liked about this deck is that they have a great traction story. And most importantly, they're using graphs to show the traction over time. The reason that is so important is that it helps show not just that you're growing, but also that you're growing cumulatively and that the growth is accelerating. Accelerating growth is really what your investors want to see in order to understand that you've found your product market fit and that you know how to continually keep growing this company. Exponential growth is what VCs love to see, so make sure you highlight that at every possible turn. I always say that it's much cheaper to learn from somebody else's mistake, so let's see what we can learn from Cloudsmith and the things they didn't quite get right. So here's 3 things that Cloudsmith could have improved about this deck. I was surprised to find that they had 2 solution slides in there, which I was a little confused by. You don't have to spend that much time on a solution, especially for a company that is working and is generating revenue. Realistically, the solution and the product slides explain that you have understood what your customers need, but really the story is about your traction. The thing to keep in mind is that your solution slide is meant to be strategic. You've explained the problem that you're solving, and the solution is kind of the high-level strategic way that you are thinking about how this problem can be solved. Now, it's important to separate that from your product. Your solution is typically the big strategic vision. A company very, very rarely pivots on the solution. If you're coming up with a completely different solution, you're probably talking about a completely new company. That does happen from time to time, but that probably means winding up one company, starting a new one, and starting afresh. Now, the product, however, as you're learning from your customers, you can have quite a lot of leeway with how you pivot and change and evolve your product. So the way to tell the story really is you start with the problem, make sure that your investors agree that that's a problem and that it's a problem worth solving. Then you go into the kind of strategic levels like, hey, we think this is a good way to solve this particular problem. And then you talk about the product layer. Now, the product layer is always about the past, right? It's what you've built so far. And as founders, it's often very, very tempting to spend way too much time here. The truth is, your investors probably don't give much of a crap about this specific problem at all. What they care about is whether your customers see this as a viable solution to the problem. So the way to allot your time really is to make sure you spend a fair amount of time on the problem, so that's fully understood, a little bit of time on the solution, and then as little time as you can possibly get away with on the product itself. People don't care, don't waste your time there. Cloudsmith, I have to talk with you about your team slide. It's a paradox wrapped in a PowerPoint, and I don't understand what's going on here. You clearly have a really good team. You got to this point, and somehow none of that comes through on the team slide at all. Remember that, especially at the earliest stages, your team is really the only thing your investors have to go on to figure out whether or not you're a good investment. On this slide deck, it's so fuzzy. What I really want to see is why this team is the right team to build this solution for this problem. That's really all you have to do. So you tell that story by explaining what you've done in the past and what your superpowers are. Like, why are you the right person to do this? The use of fun slides was a real facepalm moment for me. It's kind of a perfect example of what not to do. The company includes the runway, so how much time will they have after they raise this money, and a set of percentages for where they're going to spend the money. The problem is that doesn't actually help the investors understand whether or not you're going to execute well. Think about it this way. If you were going to build a house and you hired a general contractor and they told you, hey, it's going to cost $1 million and we're going to spend 30% of the money on the kitchen, 30% on the bathroom, 20% on the outside walls, and 20% on the roof. I don't know if that adds up to 100%. Pretend it did. The point is, you don't care how many percentages they're trying to spend on the various parts. You just want to know if you have a livable house at the end of it. Same is true for the investors. They want to understand, at the end of spending the money they just invested, are you ready for the next round of investments? And the way to explain that is like, hey, we're going to hit these milestones and we're going to hit these particular goals and we're going to do it by this time. The best way to do that is to use so-called SMART goals. SMART is an acronym meaning specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. If you manage to translate your goals, i.e. what you're going to spend money on, into good SMART goals, it helps the investors understand that you have a clear plan for what needs to be done. And if you manage to deliver on your plan, they have a really clear vision for what happens at the end of it. Are you ready to raise more money? Is your company in a good place? That is the right way to do your ask and use a fund slide. So just to quickly recap, make sure you set the stage for what you're about to tell your investors. Tell the history of your company briefly, but focus mostly on the future. Tell your traction story really well, and graphs are your friend here. Don't focus too much on your product, because honestly, nobody cares. Make sure that your team slide completely shines. And finally, explain what you're going to accomplish with the cash. That's the whole point of raising money in the first place. All right, that's it for today's episode, but don't you worry. Equity will be back on Wednesday. If you want to keep up with us in the meantime, you can follow us on X and Threads under the handle EquityPod. If you want to submit your pitch deck to get your very own pitch deck teardown, check out today's installment in the show notes and follow the Submit Your Deck link. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon.
Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.